All right, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to introduce you to docassemble. And we're going to have you write a very simple docassemble program, another Hello World exercise. What we're going to do is you need your docassemble login to access our docassemble server. You should have found the instructions for that above. You will also need to ask for elevator permissions so that you actually can access the playground, which is where we're going to be working. If you haven't done that yet, you can pause, go up there, and ask for permissions, and then in a little while I should get those to you, and then you can move on. Let's go ahead and I'll share my screen, and let's give it a go. Okay, so here we are at the playground. Now, it doesn't take you to the playground immediately. What you want to do is you want to, after you log in, go up to where it has your email, and then click there, and then you can click on Playground, and it will take you right here to Playground. Now, I've gone ahead and I have an empty playground. You probably have something in there which is just by default. To make it entirely new and clean, you can just go ahead and click Add, and it will clear that out and give you a new, fresh playground. It's going to be our Hello World exercise. So we're just going to go ahead and let's call it Hello World. I'm going to do an underscore world, and then I'm going to hit Save. And then what you'll notice is it'll save it, and it actually adds a .ylm to the name there because this is a YAML file, and that's the extension for a YAML file. Now, docassemble is, as you saw, capable of building these really wonderful, complicated guided interviews. Each of those screens you saw in the examples above is defined by something we call a block in docassemble. So we're going to be going over some basic nomenclature here as we build out. The first thing I want to do is show you a question block. And so very similar to Q&A, there's going to be some special text that you type, and then the computer will interpret that in a special way. In this case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to type out the word question. And what I'm going to do is let's just do Hello World. Okay. I'm going to just do question, Hello World. And now I'm curious, is this enough? Is this all we would have to do to get something to go? And the answer is no. But this is very close to where we're going to do. And actually, if you look down a little bit on the screen, you'll get a little clue of what's coming up. But before you do that, I'm going to go ahead and just hit Save and Run and see what happens. Now, the first thing we're going to see is an error message. And the reason I want you to see the error message first is because I want you to think about the fact that error messages, remember, are just guides to help us get where we want to be. And so they're often going to give us great information about what's happening so that we can change things to get the result we want. In this case, it says docassemble has finished executing all code blocks, marked as initial or mandatory, and finished asking all questions marked as mandatory, if any. So it's saying, I did everything you asked me to do, but there was nothing there. And so that's why it's throwing an error. So if we go back to our playground, and if we scroll down a little bit, actually, we'll see there are example blocks down here. So in your playground, there are a couple things going on. Here is where we're going to type the text of our code. To the right, you'll see a list of variables. You actually can, these are variables that are already built in. As you create new variables, they'll show up there as well. And if you scroll down even further, you'll see a bunch of example blocks. And those example blocks, when you click on them, will show you examples of code under source here, and then as well as a preview of what that would look like. You can actually click here, view more documentation, and it'll take you to the full docassemble documentation, which is quite robust. And if we look here, we see this sample Hello World. We notice there's something here, there are a couple somethings here that weren't in the code we had above. The first one is this line that says mandatory true. So if I take that and I add that, and now I hit Save and Run, any guesses what's going to happen? Well, it looks a lot like the example now. Let's see. Save and Run. Hello World. There you go. If you've been following along, you now have written your first docassemble program. Congratulations. If we go back, we can talk a little bit about why we need this here. That error originally that we saw was because we didn't have that there. So what docassemble does, it will start at the top of this file, and it's going to go down the file, and it's going to say, do I have to do this thing you're asking me to do? And if the answer is no, it's not going to do it. So it went down here, and nowhere did I tell it it had to do this. And so it didn't do it. Then I added this mandatory key, and now, I set it to true, and it went ahead and it did it. And so what we can actually do is we can create multiple screens by doing multiple blocks. And the separation between a block are 3 dashes. So I can have one screen, hello world, and then I can have another screen after that. Let's just go ahead and change this around a little. I'm going to change this hello world to something else. I'm going to say, what is your name? And I'm going to do something else. If you notice down here on the example, there's this vertical pipe. It's the character, usually it's the shift and the character, the button above return or enter on most keyboards. There's the pipe, and then text comes over and it's indented once. And you'll notice that one of the nice things about the playground is that it highlights the text with different colors. And that lets you know that different text is being treated differently. So we see these keys here, these little bits that are telling us to do something, question, colon, or mandatory colon. And then we see the values over to the right, and they have different colors. And you notice what happened here with this text, what is your name? It started off sort of black there, but when I got it to the right space, it turned red. What this pipe is doing is this pipe is allowing us, we had a working program before without the pipe, but that was all on one line. If you want to be able to type multiple lines, like what is your name? And then you wanted to go on for more paragraphs or something, or for just have more text, you would want to be able to do multiple lines. You need to have this pipe, new line, and indent it. And so it's very much like Q&A in that the indentation matters. Here, the editor is nice, though, and you can sort of see that there's a difference in the code based upon coloration. So we're going to say, what is your name? I'm going to tell you another couple keys here just to sort of give us some more things to think about. We can do something called a sub-question. And that's going to look just like a question. We're going to, by convention, do the pipe thing again, even though we really don't have to. I'm going to say, please be specific. And now just sort of general a bit. And then I'm going to do another thing, and I'm going to call it fields. Fields plural. I don't need the pipe here, actually. I'm going to do a dash. I'm going to say full name. And I'll do user underscore name. And actually, before we do this next screen, let's just remove that. And let's just see what this does. So I go ahead and click save and run. And think about it. And now I can see what those different parts do. The sub question does the text down here. The question does the text up here. Very much like Q&A, the question is not necessarily a question. It could be a statement here. We saw that with the hello world. And then we have full name and then a place where I can enter in something. And then if I click continue, I'm going to get an error because there's no more screens. There's nowhere to continue to. So again, we get that same error. I've done everything you've asked me to do. There's nothing else. And then it goes on. I could keep reading it. That at that last screen, it's nice to sort of give it, some last thing, make some type of exit screen. So I've got this little block here. I've told it it's mandatory. I have a question. I have a sub question, and then I have fields. Let's see what happens if I go ahead and I create another block. Okay, another block is roughly equivalent to another screen. We'll see why that's not entirely correct here in a moment, but for right now, it's good enough for our purposes. I'm going to do a question again. And I'm going to say, hello. Okay, so now we have this, what is your name? It's going to ask a question, and then it's going to say, hello. I can leave this here, or I can do the by convention, pipe, hello, and then indent. And any guesses as to what's going to happen? Ah, you're right. It's gonna give me an error. Let's see why. We got this. I'll say my name is David. Error. Well, what's going on, remember, is that docassemble starting at the top, it's saying, and it does this block by block. It really does it line by line, but block by blocks, sort of, it'll include blocks. Think about it. In this first block, it's going to go through, do I have to do this? Well, the mandatory key says true. It's true. You do have to do this. So docassemble, you have to do this. So it does that screen. Then after that, it goes down to this next block, which is what we call the bit of code separated by those 3 dashes, usually equivalent to a screen. And there's nothing that says it has to do it, so it doesn't do it. So let's tell it that it has to do it. So I'm going to do mandatory true, like I did above. And now let's see what happens if I say this. What's your name? David. Great. Continue. Hello. All right. Well, now we've got a very simple docassemble interview, which is asking our name and then showing us another screen. It's not super interesting yet, but let's get interesting. We didn't really dissect everything that was going on up in this block. We know this mandatory thing is telling docassemble it has to do this. The question is obviously giving us the prompt. That's the header. Sub-question is giving us the text below that. Fields is what's producing that. We saw it here. It's producing that full name, and then it has a space. What's going on here with this user underscore name? So based upon our work in our previous weeks, you might guess that that was the name of a variable, and you'd be correct. That's the variable name. So whatever name I put in here is going to be placed into a variable called user underscore name. One of the reasons why you really would know that's a variable is you look over here on the right, you'll see that username has been added to our variables. So that's the variable there, username. So I actually can do something interesting here. And let's see if you can figure out what I'm doing by the syntax. One nifty trick is when you have variables here, you can click on them and it'll just insert them in there. That's really good to make sure that you don't mistype them. But so now what I've got is I've got this $, curly Q bracket, user underscore name, close curly Q bracket. Any guesses how this will behave? Right? Yeah, let's see. Save and run. What is your name? David. Hello, David. Okay, so obviously what's going on here is this $ curly Q bracket combination is saying don't treat this bit like normal text. Do something different. In fact, treat the stuff in the curly Q brackets like some type of code. And in this case, we're echoing back out this variable name. So there we now have done something really impressive. We've created a program that prompts the user for information, gets that information, and then is capable of echoing that information back out to the user or doing something with that information. Well, let's see all the stuff we can do with that by introducing one more little fun thing here. We're going to make another block, so another 3 dashes. And instead of a question block, which is what we tend to call those blocks with questions, we're going to make something called a code block. And you're going to note I'm not adding the mandatory to it. And let's see if we can figure out why in a moment. I am going to use the pipe. And I'm coming down here, and now I'm going to make a conditional statement. These will look familiar to you now because of your work with JavaScript. User name, and let's just say equal Scotty. The syntax is a little different than JavaScript. Instead of curly Q brackets to set off the if-then statement, we do a colon, and then we indent. The indenting is very important. The code in docassemble is actually, it's Python. So if you're at all familiar with Python, you could just write Python code directly into the code section. And here I'm going to go ahead and say secret message equals beam me up. And then I'm going to go back up to here, and I'm going to add something in here, and I'm actually going to, I'm going to save this. In saving that, I got my secret message variable here now. So now I can do a whoop, add it in. And now here's an interesting question for you. What do you think is going to happen if we save and run this? It's going to go through the first block. It's going to say, do I have to do this? The answer is yes, it's mandatory, so you do have to do a docassemble, so it's going to show you that screen. Then it's going to go to the next screen. It's going to say, do I have to do this? And the answer is going to be yes, I do have to do this. But here's an interesting thing. So it will do that. But then the question is, how is it going to do that? Well, what ends up happening is it's going to go through, it gets to here, it goes to hello, and it has username. And actually, let's show you something. I'm going to actually just remove this. I'm going to cut this out here just to show, make a point. I got the hello username. What I'm going to do is actually remove this mandatory true from the first block and save and edit and see what happens. What's your name? Wait a second, why is it asking my name when I didn't tell it was mandatory? Well, when I misspelled my name, but that's not a big deal. Davey. I know I'm having never have I ever vibes here. Sorry, I don't know if pop culture references will work over Zoom videos, but anyhow. What I've got going on here is now, let's think about what happened. docassemble went through, it said, do I have to do this? The answer was no, there was no mandatory block. So it didn't do it the first time I went through, actually. It got to here, and it said, do I have to do this? The answer was yes. But then the second question docassemble always asks is, do I have to do this? And then it asks, can I do this? And the answer was no, because it didn't know what username was. So it went back up to the front, and it said, well, can I figure out what username is? Does this tell me what username is? Does this tell me what username is? And when it got to this block, it realized, oh, if I run this block, it will ask the user for username, and then I'll get what I need to do that second block. So I'm going to go ahead and paste my code back in here. And now we only have this one mandatory block. And it's going to go through, it's going to say, do I need to do this? No. Do I need to do this? Yes. And I say, can I do this? No. So I'll go back up to the top. It'll go, okay, well, does this tell me what I need? Well, this will tell me part of what I need. It'll tell me the username. And then it's going to get to hear the secret message. It's going to say, well, how do I know that? Let me go see. And then it'll have to go through all of them again. And then it'll get to this block, and it'll see that it has to run this code in order to answer that. So even though I don't have a mandatory here, this code should still run. So let's see what's going to happen if I run this. What's your name? I say Scotty. And it says, hello, Scotty. Beam me up. Great. So hopefully you remember from the previous lesson what's going on here is we've got an if statement. It's conditional. It's saying if the value in username is equal to Scotty, and we know that's an evaluation because it's double quotation marks. So if the value of username is Scotty, then do the stuff in here. The stuff in here is set secret message. So assign the value beam me up Scotty to the variable secret message. And we saw that because then we saw secret message then echoed out here. So now I've done something really interesting. You've asked for input, you've got that input, you've evaluated something around that input, and based upon what someone said, you were able to respond in a certain way. Anyone want to guess what's going to happen if I went through and say if I came back to the same one I just did and I didn't say my name was Scotty, if I said my name was David? Well, let's see. There was an error. Let's see if we can read this error and figure out what went wrong. Interview has an error. There was a reference to a variable secret message that could not be looked up in the question file. And then here we have that, where it references it, and it says that it's referenced here, but somehow it didn't know what it was. Why is that? Well, if we look at the code, we realize that secret message is only ever set if I answer Scotty. So when I answered Scotty, it worked fine. But if I don't answer Scotty, then actually the interview can never figure out what the value of secret message was because it's never set. And so it errors out because it can't actually answer the question. It can't echo this out. So what we can do is we can make this an else if statement, and we can go ahead, we can have our secret message. Make sure we indent everything properly. And here I'll just set it equal to empty bit of text. And now if I run this, I get David, hello David, but if I say Scotty, beam me up. And so you've made a very simple docassemble interview. There's only one mandatory true, and the other ones get pulled in based upon when they're needed. Now, the reason that's important is because you can imagine a scenario where you might have an interview that has a lot of different screens, and whether or not something needs to be asked depends upon the answer to some other question. And so by having this execution order, which is that how it decides to do each of these blocks, it can only show the user the block that it needs to finish the interview. So if it turns out there's something that it didn't need to know, it won't ask that block. And the way it knows whether or not it needs to know it is whether or not it is affirmatively told it needs to do it, or if it is logically necessary for it to need to do it in order to complete what's in there. And so there's your first little docassemble interview. And that's your hello world. And we're going to do another quick exercise down below and show you another cool docassemble tool. But that's your hello world. So hopefully you had fun doing that. And now you're all docassembled.